Okay, so now we're back into chapter 24, The West and the World, Cultural Crisis and the New Imperialism, 1870 to 1914. 1914 will then be World War One, and it's kind of well, I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? That we look at Western civilization, we look at the Enlightenment, and we look at the advances of science, and many things that those of us from the Western world are proud of. And many people who even have maybe been on the wrong end of the political spectrum, meaning victims of colonialism, of even slavery, now find themselves benefiting from many aspects of the West. But that sometimes is used also as an excuse or a way of kind of trying to minimalize a lot of the things that we're reading about here in this chapter. And so you may notice that we kind of go through this back and forth thing where we're reading about stuff that you say, oh man, this is really amazing stuff. This is awesome. I mean, Newton, Kepler, Copernicus, wow. And we see these advancements in technology and all this, and then there's this human cost factor, right? And we're gonna really escalate into a lot of almost manic reactions from now on as we go into the history of the world in the West. And I think in this sense, it's not that history has really been different. For me personally, I don't believe in the good old days. I don't mean that there wasn't goodness in the old days. I just mean that I think it's a very natural human thing to look to the past with nostalgia when the future is unstable or seems uncertain. And I think that that's always been that way. And of course, the past has meant different things to different people. If you watch Leave It to Beaver, if you remember that TV show or many of those older sitcoms in the United States, the show is really. I loved it. I loved watching Andy Griffith and all those kind of things. But they tend to make a lot of people think back of again the good old days. But you'll notice that those were very white TV shows and very white middle class TV shows. And they represented women in a very specific role. And they didn't address a lot of diversity or potential of things being different than this ideal that is put out. So I don't know. I just think as we go through this, and there's so much changes taking place in America and the world right now. So many things that are different and so many things that are the same. But I think that these last chapters that we're going over for this section are so important to really getting a grasp on the modern world and all that's complex. And what's different, I think, actually, is going to be our shift of ideals. So while humans have always been killing each other, and there's been wars and famines and pestilences and government abuses and mob violence and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, the difference is, I think, on one hand, and I think this is where we're going to see more contradiction and why nowadays teaching this class is different than it was in the past, is that we see our contradictions more fully now, that we know better, in a sense, like we believe in human values. So in a sense, let's go back to the Enlightenment. There was this idea that human beings had value in a way that never happened before, but then they still wanted to do slavery. So slavery then had to mean if humans are equal, if all humans are equal, or all men at the very least, then how do you justify slavery? You make them categorized not as actually men. Okay, chattel slavery, like in the U.S. Constitution originally. That's in the 3/5 compromise, by the way. Look it up if you don't know about that. So these are just kind of things that we're going to think about and explore more in this chapter. So, okay. So just to start off, scientific transformations. I think this is really interesting, and I think it's kind of eye-opening. And there were certain parts of this that I forgot about that reminded me of that. The advancement of medicine at this time really, and science really starts kicking into gear around this time, and it does in a lot of things that are quite amazing for the first time in human history. And it talks about how, it was common to see major spread of contagious diseases by bacteria. And, you can't mess around with bacteria. I'll kind of admit something a little bit embarrassing. I actually got a tattoo infection a while back. And I was luckily had some antibiotics from the doctor to save it. And the tattoo was saved and me. But that was a terrible experience. And of course, you kind of have to laugh when it's like self-inflicted, like, oh, I just wanted to put some art on my body, and this is what I get. I could see my mother just staring at me. This is what you get. I told you not to get a tattoo, right? But and this was from a clean place too, by the way. Good artist. But anyways, things happen like that. But bacterias, they kill, and they're painful, and that's understood. That they always say, oh, make sure. I mean, this happened from a clean needle, and you're warned, don't especially go into tattoo parlors that are not really clean and sanitized and all that kind of stuff, right? Because we now know you got to be sanitized, gloves, but all that kind of stuff. Well, this all wasn't understood before, and I mean, even shaving and nicking yourself could be the end of you, or cause you terrible pain. I remember reading on some Norse myths and the Icelandic scholar Snorri Sturluson from the 13th century. And in the story, they're talking about how there was this Icelandic saint that people would pray to, if they needed to be healed, like after cutting themselves from shaving. I mean, in other words, something like that actually could be very detrimental. And so you see people like Louis Pasteur, coming up with things that are going to help abolish this problem. You're not going to doctors are actually going to start washing their hands eventually and creating clean environments. So it's very important. That's all I'm going to say about this for now, but I mean, I think you can get the point and go through the reading on that. Now, with Darwin, Darwin is really a very significant factor here that I want to talk about, because he is going to be a major influence on the entire field of science. And I would like you to kind of come into this with an open mind, to not bother yourself about debating if Charles Darwin to you is right or wrong. Because I know many of my students are very strong in the faith-based communities, and very much opposed to Darwin. A good chunk of my family is that way, and just mentioning him is like mentioning a mass murderer or something. Is not a good name to drop down. I'd say that Charles Darwin and Karl Marx were considered the two twin evils by many of the older conservative crowds, because they really threatened traditional values for a lot of people. And so, when you talk about Karl Marx, as we mentioned earlier, and then to talk about Darwin in any neutral way, it's very difficult, because you have people who praise them, and actually, still Karl Marx gets a lot of praise from people. It might shock a lot of folks, but it does. And Charles Darwin definitely, probably much more so. And then they are very much hated. I had an older relative years ago, and I said something about Darwin or Marx. I can't remember what I said. I can't remember what the topic was. And they said, I said something about Marx, I believe, and the relative said, oh, he's I can't express the term, but he said a derogatory sexual act that would imply gayness. And then I said, I don't think that he was gay. And he goes, maybe that was Darwin. I don't know. They were all gay. They were all homosexual. So it's kind of interesting to me, and I'm bringing that up because it's a very controversial thing that, and this is in the chapter, right? That homosexuality, Darwinism, communism, these are things that, uh, you know, really get mentioned and really threaten that traditional world order again. And now we're seeing with Supreme Court justice on marriage and gay marriage, we're seeing that further for people who have a very strong commitment to what they consider traditionalism. This world order is crumbling, and there's been this feeling for a long time. Now, want to be respectful to the debate and add nuance and realize that my students are always going to reflect all of these different feelings and thoughts, and I respect that. But I think it's good to discuss about some of these out loud, what some of the dialogues are going about them, because these are historical people and events that actually really affect people socially and on a personal level. Now, having said that, I'm going to end this lecture. I'm going to go back into discussion. I want you to really listen and to think about what I'm going to talk about. And then again, the actual cultural and societal influence that Darwin and then other scientists had to Western civilization at this time.